Right, let's see what I can say. So you were what was the one little criticism that you had was about whether I thought that collective group, when we talk collectively about the intentionality of groups, it's metaphorical? No. Yeah, that was one thing. Okay. So I don't mean to say that the Romans wanted to conquer the world or something of the sort. I mean, that's not literally true. What I meant to say is that when we refer to a collective entity like the Roman Empire or the Romans or the United Nations or etc., we talk as if they are really an individual or a person taking decisions and making decisions, although that's not really clearly not true. I mean, that's clearly not the case. And so there are many of the ways that we speak, and I think that in a lot of the discussions, there's a lot of things that we assign of the way we speak about groups that because we're talking about it as if it's an individual doing these things, it seems that you cannot reduce it to, you cannot eliminate the reference to that thing because that's just the way that we've been talking about the United Nations decided. And then of course you cannot say, but every single person, every single Roman wanted to conquer the world? No. Did you come up with that idea? No. Did you come up with that idea? So it's a similar case to the tolerance in the Dutch case that you look at individuals and the group and you'll say different things about them. So that's one of the reasons that people tend to argue that it's irreducible to particular individual decisions or belief states or etc. But I think partly it has to do because of the way that we refer to some collectives, particularly into institutionalized ones. We refer to them as if they were someone, a particular individual or a person. But between the big ones, between the Romans and us, I mean, there's a big difference in how we decide how to go for dinner, which does involve each of our decisions and how we may or may not rely on others to make decisions. Yeah, but thanks. This was fun. It was interesting, and you gave me lots of really interesting examples. Let's see if I had something else. Yeah, I think that's enough because it was very useful and very good examples that you gave me and cases to think. So thanks for that. Yeah, thanks. I'm going to. I'll use yours again if you don't mind.
Okay, so I like thinking about the plural case, and I think all of this stuff is super interesting and challenging and trying to figure out how it works. But I don't think it has anything to do with the they say or any of that. So I think thinking about the plural is a really great way to get away from all that framework. And I don't think almost anything you said had needed that. So I'm going to try to get you to tell me why you think that. And then I there's one particular thing that I think is really helpful about the plural case. So the way I like to think about whether we should call something a they say or essentially indexical or something is as see if it performs a bunch of explanatory tasks, whether there's some theoretical role it plays. So I think it's clear we use it. It's opaque. It can generate Frege puzzles, and a lot of the cases you went through were like that.
Sure.
It might, and so that's one task. I mean, all referring terms are like that.
Yeah.
Issues about immunity to error might or might not work. I think they don't do that, but I think we're sort of in agreement on that.
Yeah, I'm not sure about those.
But there's one sort of core explanatory task that the they say or the essential indexical is supposed to do that I think at least is at the core of what most people think about, and those are the connections to agency.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the stuff Eros was talking about
Sure.
in the first talk, and that Perry talks about in a lot of the later papers and also in those early papers. And I think the weak case is just great for a deflationary proposal. It's just not the case that for us to do something, we have to locate ourselves relative to the object in egocentric space and move around. So it's interesting to me that you didn't even try to do that with the with the plural case. Do you see this? I think if you think about all the specific occasions, the turning the light switch, and you have to locate your finger relative to the light switch, and you have to position yourself, and you go send all that terminology and that ideology that comes in with the day say talk often is really hard to push on when you go to the plural case.
Right.
So
Okay.
so if that's like one of your cases, it's that whole agency connection kind of goes
Right.
away at least.
Okay. So I can reply in those I can reply, and I think you're wrong. One of the, I mean, I mentioned it briefly, and I didn't explain. So the kind of examples on the rationality of the decisions in some kind of game theoretical examples, they appeal to why it is rational for certain options to be made, and it's only rational for certain options to be made if you think that people are thinking collectively, if the people are thinking about us, what we should do and how we should act. And if you try to put it just in terms of individual terms, then you cannot, I mean, that's the case of the prisoner's dilemma of high-low, where if you just explain the rationality of those individual rationality conditions, then you cannot explain why it would be rational to choose a certain option rather than another, which it seems puzzling that it wouldn't be rational to choose. And if you explain that collectively, and if people are thinking about how they should act jointly, then you can account for the rationality of those options. But there are other, so in the other cases that I don't have, and in fact it's a pity because they're all nicely visual examples that people in cognitive science use, examples of how people predict what the other is going to do, for instance, when dancing tango. So you have ways that you have the things that they call like forward modeling and different kinds of particular ways of interaction and doing things together. And sometimes they're very complex things that people do together, like flip someone in the air and they have to catch them and you have to predict how it's going to go. And there's all the various kinds of positioning yourself and positioning you with respect to the other person and seeing that as a performance of a joint thing. So those are the kinds of, I mean, it's visually, when you see the examples visually, it's much easier to figure that out. So you have, in terms of action, and both in terms of intentions about what people should do, but also in terms of planning actual physical action jointly, of playing games, dancing, etc., that require very complex forms of coordination. That requires that people act jointly in specific ways, and hence when people working on these things of mechanisms of social cognition, they come up with all the kind of neurological and physiological mechanisms that allow people to do together. And people who lack those are particularly, like, you have kids that in different ways of lacking social capacities and particular ways of doing specific things that are sort of impairments, let's say. And so I think that there's enough of the work on social cognition to think that there's enough basis there to think that insofar as is... So I was more interested in drawing the parallels in the Descendant Novice the way I did, because I take it that whatever these other people are doing are establishing enough of the actual action things, both in terms of the rationality of decision-making, in joint rationality of decision-making, and in terms of the physical activities that people can make.
I think we're agreeing.
Okay.
So the joint decision-making is all, but it doesn't mean that we have to locate ourselves in we space. There's no analog to that. So the story is, in order to turn off the light here.
But there is entangle.
No,
there is entangle.
There are a few cases where people move very closely together. But if you and I are going to hire a postdoc, there's nothing we can perform that. There's an infinite number of actions you can think of that you and I can perform that requires absolutely nothing like you and I locating ourselves in a communal we space. That's just an extraordinarily implausible generalization. I mean, it might be that in a few cases, if you and I were to dance the tango, something
but I don't need it to occur all the time everywhere.
I agree.
I need it to occur sometimes somewhere for there to make sense of the existence of this special mode of cognition. And if that exists, then that's good enough.
So there's no necessary connection between...
I don't see it the way you do.
Isn't accidental occasionally? Sometimes we have
to do it, but not always. It's not accidental. Playing football doesn't require accidental coordination between players, or dancing tango, or doing synchronized swimming. It's not accidental coordination between people.
No, not in those cases, but between agency and plural thought and collective action in general. It's it's a contingent connection. In some cases it may be, in other cases clearly not.
Okay, I don't think that's clear, but okay. Thanks for the question.
Any further questions?
Where is that? Okay.
So just to pick up on a example of Herman, excuse me, Herman's, suppose we want to hire a postdoc. Don't we have to think that, say, we're acting in the same century as one another? I mean, I don't know that that's necessary. I don't know that anything's necessary, but it really would be odd if we didn't locate ourselves in the same century if we were going to jointly hire a postdoc. So I think on that I would be agreeing with you and maybe disagreeing with Herman.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, sure. I think you need, I mean, even in the postdoc case, you'd have to, there are a lot of assumptions about shared space that you presumably have to have. Even when you hire people, like, is this going to be someone who never lets others pass in the corridor, or whatever reasons you may have? Is it someone who's going to be pleasant to be working with? Are you someone you can share your office with? And so you're locating yourself in a common space with someone. Like, I'm not hiring someone to send them to the moon. I'm hiring someone to come and work with you. And yeah, and so yeah. So thanks for this. It doesn't agree with us. It doesn't see. So what? Yeah, I mean. Okay, Marie.
Thank you. It's just a small suggestion for when further parallelism or contrast you could maybe look into when you put face to face the they say and the they know base case. So. In the they say case, a lot of people think there's reason to make a distinction between two kinds of IEM, a merely de facto or hypothetical one that seems to be relevant when we're talking about self-ascriptions of bodily properties based on the sort of internal scanning of our own bodies. And then there's this higher, stronger form of IEM that seems to be in place when we self-ascribe experiences directly. And so just prima facie, it seems to me in the de nobis case, we would expect to encounter only the weaker form of IEM, the de facto IEM, because we're all the time working under the assumption that the group we think we're a part of really exists, and that the mechanisms of social connection you have described do relate us to this collective entity. So it would seem harder to find convincing examples of strong logical IM in the de nobis case, just because we don't own mental states. We don't have phenomenology literally in common with other people. So I don't know. It's not at all an objection or anything. It's just something I'd be curious to hear more about.
Thank you. So that was kind of things that I was thinking when I was resisting thinking that there would be IEM. In the plural case, I was thinking those sort of things. But on the other hand, so two things. One of them is that I think so in the individual case might be the particular case where it doesn't seem to require that I'm working on the assumption that I exist, but every other possible case it seems to we're always assuming that exists. I mean, that's there. So you have in many cases if something exists, then you could not have failed to refer to the thing that you're referring to if that thing, assuming it exists. Yeah. So that's so. Yeah, but you're pointing to some of the doubts that I had in the plural case to begin with, and I didn't even know whether to. I wasn't even sure whether to take that line because I don't know enough of the well, the psychology work on this to think what else do these mechanisms do. I mean, what else do they allow? So you have a lot of things that are implicit and they ways of accessing other people's minds or mind reading or whatever, or mirroring or something, and it's a peculiar literature and it's peculiar things that people assume that it signifies and entails, and perhaps there's still a lot of work to be done there. But I admit that there might be ways to make sense of that work that people have been making, to make sense of those mechanisms are the way you access other people's mental states and emotional states, right? In your case, you access them through some way, and through emotion, contagion, or whatever it's called, that's how you access all your collective mental states and other people's mental states or emotional states or something like that. If you're a healthy, fully developed human being, right? Yes, but thanks. So, but I'm not clear about what the right answer here ought to be, because I'm not sure what these mechanisms at stake what they really test or really reveal about how people function socially. I think they're still at early stages as well. Many things are still at fairly early stages.
One last question.
Thanks.
Thank you. I'm not completely sure I fully understand the idea of the essential de nobis, but I was wondering whether you would get at least some of what you want by considering plural versions of original Perry puzzles, like the amnesiacs.
Mm-hmm.
So you could have Lingens and Leo Peters in the Stanford Library, and Lauben and Herbert Garner in the Harvard Library. And they would know that each pair would know that they are in one of these libraries, but not which of these two pairs they are. It could even be that like Lingens knows that either he is Lingens and the other guy is Peters, or else he's Lauben and the other guy is Garner. Mm-hmm. Would that give you some
Sure.
Essential de nobis?
Yeah. So there's this there are, I mean, in the literature, not in philosophical literature, out there in the world in the literature, there are literary examples of situations like this. So, for instance, in Gabriel Garcia Marques' Under the Years of Solitude, there's in Macondo, when it rains for a longer time, people all become amnesiacs, and they don't know their names, they don't know who they are, and so you have a community of people living on the family living in a house, and they've forgotten everything, and presumably they can still do some things together. I don't remember how it stops and how bad it gets, because it's been a while since I last read it. But you can definitely have similar examples, and which I haven't used similar examples of amnesics and the differences. But in those cases, what we're distinguishing is. So suppose in Macondo, people forget what their names are and what they do for what they're supposed to do in the morning, and they're forgetting everything while it's raining a lot. So you would be losing all descriptive information associated with the name of the city and their family names, etc. But they could still jointly act and refer to themselves in some.
They would have directly observational knowledge,
yeah, sure.
of their mutual relation,
yeah, sure.
but not how they are related to.
But forget how they got there and how that came about. Yeah.
So would that give you such a case?
Sure. I mean, that's another parallel case that we could adopt again in the plural case. I mean, sure. I think so. Yeah, I think it would work as well. I mean, I think so. Thanks. No, I was just wondering back to I was just thinking of a synchronized swimming team, not a synchronized swimming team, but say a basketball team, or where strategy is involved with acting together. And so you'd have rationality of agency to increase your chances of winning together with actual physical synchronicity of movements and actions.
Yeah, actually, I didn't understand why this synchronization would be needed for the plural version of the say thoughts.
Right.
So that's
no,
something
that's the
I didn't really
yeah.
get. Was that
okay.
because you wanted to have a plural analog of immunity?
Yeah, that was an example that presumably, if this case works, if this case of we're doing something, there's a mechanism that people associate with a group implicitly starting to do something together at the same time, coordinately, without thinking explicitly about doing that. So that was one example. There might be, and many of these mechanisms involved in doing something together as a group, many of these things are done implicitly. But they can be tied, as in a football team or a basketball team or a volleyball team, to planning and acting as a group, not in doing something at the same time, but coordinately. So coordinated physical action towards a common goal that involves strategy so that the group wins or the group becomes the champions or whatever.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Teresa.
Thank you.
So we take a